Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. This is Ke Seto Kaiba, and today we just have a fun little casual game that I wanted to show. This is a game I really enjoy a lot. It's one of my most memorable games. By no means is this even close to one of my, best quality games objectively. And this game was actually played almost exactly 4 years ago. This game was actually played in November of 2018, and this was an in-person game, which is also why you don't see my chess.com profile picture there, because I just input this manually. And I never even played an over-the-board game at this point, so this was just like a casual thing with friends that you would, that kind of situation. And I can only guess my rating was probably about 1500 or so back then, just because, basing that off of my online rating. And my opponent also never played online. It's just a casual thing with friends. And I estimate maybe they were about 1200. So I just kind of manually input those. But we got a really beautiful chess game in this one, a very nice little miniature. And so just for enjoyment and just kind of fun, sometimes it's kind of nice to go over some of those casual games. And it's nice to go over games like Magnus Carlsen and some other top players in the world. But when you constantly analyze every single day and you do the same intensive stuff over and over, it's sometimes fun to just kind of sit back a little and enjoy some little elements of a casual chess game. So we'll get started with it. So in this game, I begin with d4. My opponent plays pawn to d5. And even back then, I used to play the Queen's Gambit a lot. I still play it. And so I play pawn to c4. Now, here, usually my opponent will play e6. They play the Queen's Gambit declined most of the time. Occasionally, they experiment with c6. But again, this is just like casual friends. Neither of us have ever played a tournament at this point. We don't really know openings too much. But because we get the same thing fairly often, I think they tried to play something a little different just to kind of get me out of my opening theory that I knew. And so they play bishop to f5, which this is actually a book move, and even at the time I did know this. So if their attempt was to try and trick my opening theory, it didn't quite work. This is known as the Baltic defense. It's not too common because it's not really one of the best openings that black can choose, but maybe their attempt was to try and get me out of theory. So I played c captures d5, just take the pawn, and they recapture with the queen, which is okay, but usually if they play the Baltic defense, they usually want to exchange this bishop for this knight. And the reason why is exactly if they don't, which is what happens in the game, then I get to play the move knight c3. And if you had exchanged here, it's not ideal to exchange on b1 and give up your active bishop for an inactive, undeveloped piece. But at least you save a tempo because then this knight is not attacking the queen. So, it's just small little details. Maybe they could have perhaps improved. But, again, it's just a casual game. And, it is what it is. You can't really go back and change what was played. So they retreat the queen with queen to d7. They had to move it somewhere once it was attacked. And so because of this, I'm already able to grab the center. It's always nice to follow opening principles. And here I play pawn to e4. Really just generic pawn move. I'm just attacking this bishop on f5, contesting more of the center. And maybe this bishop will help get developed out soon now that this pawn is no longer on e2. So they retreat back, bishop g5. Everything looks fairly normal so far, but I'm very happy with white's position. I have a very nice center. Let's not forget that this square is controlled by my knight. So a lot of these central squares are controlled. If we look at these 4 central squares here, I already control 3 of them. So this is pretty good for white. Very happy with my position. And so if you already have a nice position, we can just improve on it. Just keep developing. I play knight f3, get one step closer to castle and kingside, and then everything was, going to be pretty good for us here. They play pawn to e6, which I actually like this move for black, because even though it's not developing a piece per se, they're helping to get this bishop developed. Maybe it'll go to b4, maybe it'll go somewhere like d6, maybe perhaps even e7. But all of these moves are possible because they've moved this pawn. So this is a good move that helps facilitate piece development, so I like that move. Now in the game, I played knight to e5, thinking that, hey, this is a good chance that I can improve my knight, and maybe I can even attack the queen, and at worst, I can always take their bishop, so it's sort of like a fork. But I'm not really too tempted to take this right away, because if I was to take this, yes, I might gain the bishop pair, but they can play h captures, and maybe I don't really want to give their rook a fairly open line of attack to my potentially castled king when I go kingside. So, I'm not like thrilled to take immediately, but, I'm improving my knight to e5 in the process, so, it looks like a good move. My opponent here played queen to d6. Now, this move, I think it's okay, but I think black had a lot better, because the problem here, which I did not see in the game, was that I can actually just play bishop f4, and I think this move is very strong, looking in hindsight. It's just, where's the queen go, and this queen is already under a discovered attack, this knight can move, and of course we're threatening to take the bishop, and the queen can't even take here, because I can always take back. So, there's already some very deadly looking threats. Unfortunately, I did not find that in the game, and so I played a decent move. I set a little different trap here while developing. So I just play a normal move, just bishop d3, normal developing, getting one step closer to castle and kingside. And the little trap that I set, of course, is fairly obvious, I think, for most people, but, maybe sometimes they'll fall for it, who knows. This, of course, is a poison pawn. The queen should not take this pawn, because if they do, there's a trap that they're going to lose their queen due to a discovered check. And unfortunately for my opponent, maybe a bit uncharacteristic even for them, everyone is off days, they didn't see what the trap was, and so they actually did take this pawn. And so we'll actually see what happens if they do take it. So here comes bishop to b5 check. This is a discovered check. And so the problem is this queen is under attack, and so if they block or move their king, then I'm going to take their queen. And if they move the queen back, then of course, I have this knight covering that square as well as the bishop, and so they're going to lose the queen regardless. So they play knight to c6, blocking the check. But again, I can just take the free queen because this knight is still pinned here. So if they can't take the knight, we're just in good shape. And, of course, it looks fairly one-sided now that we've won material. But they have not resigned. They continue to play the game. And in hindsight, I'm very glad they did because we got a very beautiful, romantic style, continuation to this game here that we wouldn't have had if they hadn't, kept playing on. So if you do play on, you want to play a move like rook d8, contest the open file, kick my queen away. Makes perfect sense. And so here I think, well, before I move the queen, I'll play this move. Bishop captures c6 check, because it comes with the check, and I'm doubling their pawns, and then I can move my queen. So they recapture, and now I play queen to a4. And the idea is very simple. I just gang up on this pawn, adding a little extra pressure to it, and so they just keep developing. They play bishop to d6, and so, there wasn't really a great way to hold this pawn, so now I just take it, knight captures c6, and now, if you notice, their rook here actually doesn't have too many available squares for it. And so they played rook to a8, but we can see it's really running out of squares here. This knight controls a lot, and, it's not so great that this rook is a bit passive and doesn't really have too many places to go to. And we also notice this other rook is completely out of play. This knight is still undeveloped. They do have their bishops out, but I would say that black is a bit in trouble, and especially because their king is in the center. We even have a discovered check coming up right here, so this is very tricky for black to handle. But with all this being said, I think a lot of players would be maybe a bit eager, and they would play that discovered check immediately, and they would play somewhere. I don't know if they would go here, that looks like a good stabilizing move, or maybe they'd take this, realizing that's a check so they can win the pawn, something along those lines. And I think they're okay moves, but I was really glad in the game, because in the game I thought, you know what, I have a good position, I can be a little patient, and so I played the interesting move e5, because, black's king isn't going anywhere yet. I can create a threat and just slowly improve my position. And even if that means attacking this bishop and gaining a little extra space in the center, I was very happy with myself for, being able to kind of sit on the position and play a small improving move without playing the move that I thought, initially. If I had played this maybe a year before this point, early, say, 2017, so 2018, I'm pretty sure I would have just moved this knight, played some discovered check, and maybe it would have been okay, but maybe white is actually better. And I think e5 is a creative move where I do something productive, and based on what black does, I might even have better. And so here, I was already calculating if they were like move the bishop to c5, and maybe the game would continue longer. But when they played bishop to e7, objectively this is a mistake, but I was excited here. I was practically out of my seat with excitement. And so I'll pause the video for a bit and see if anyone can figure out this solution to this puzzle. And if you want, you can take a look at it yourself. And if not, then, you can just wait for a few seconds here for everyone else. And then with the magic of, online, we can kind of warp to that point and see what the game solution was. Okay, so if you've solved this, congratulations. If not, then enjoy the ride. So this is a forced mate in 5. And I actually calculated this, even with my 1500 or so estimate, rating level. I was able to visualize this. It's a very cool pattern. Super excited to play this. So it starts with the move that I was so excited to play, knight to b8 check. And this is such a cool move. Because here, the king doesn't want to go to d8 because, of course, this is a mate in 1. So, alright, so the king really has to go somewhere. And so, if the king moves over, okay, so king to f8, logical. Now we have knight to d7 check. And now the king doesn't have too many squares. It's got one legal move, which is king to e8. And now you play knight f6, which is a double check. This knight and the queen are both giving checks, so the king must move. They don't have time to, say, block with this pawn, because this knight is still giving check to the king. So the king must move. Again, they can't go to d8 because it's the same mate in 1 threat that we saw earlier. So they must go back. So king back to f8. And now the beautiful idea that comes with this, we have queen to e8 check. Forcing move, and again, the king cannot recapture because the knight is protecting the queen. So the only move they have is to accept the queen with rook captures e8. And in the game, my opponent didn't actually see this. I think they thought they were getting back into the game because they got my queen. A bit confused at what my idea was. But now I play the very nice, picturesque, beautiful knight to d7 smothered checkmate. And this is such a cool, just a visually aesthetic checkmate, I think, because, how often do you get all of black's forces really concentrated within like one quadrant of the chessboard? I mean, this is just such a cool looking thing where literally the king is surrounded by their own forces, and one lone knight, is able to deliver this checkmate. Now, granted, I sacrificed the queen for it, and it was all force, but it's just such a cool idea. And even though the smothered mate is fairly common, I think it's a rare mate in actual games, but it's a common pattern I think people see. It's so much more common to happen in the corner of the chessboard, but for this to happen just on the edge of the chessboard, surrounded by its own pieces, it's so much more rare. And this was not my first smothered checkmate ever. I had played it once or twice before, but never on the edge of the board like this. It was always in the corner. So this was just like one of those rare, fun little things where, even years later, I still remember this. It's still one of my more memorable games. And as we can see, my opponent fell, for that little basic trap very early in the game. They lost their queen. So it wasn't really a back and forth struggle. It was fairly one-sided for a game. That's probably the only drawback to this. But, it's just so cool. It looks like a Paul Morphy, chess game or something from the romantic era of chess, where you just get this beautiful checkmate, this picturesque lone knight, checkmating the king on the edge, surrounded by its own forces. So it's just a fun little game I thought I'd show everyone. Maybe some others got as much enjoyment out of it as I did. It's just one of those things where, you play enough chess, you just start to kind of enjoy some of the more picturesque moments and maybe some of the less analytical. So I hope everyone enjoyed this chess game, and I'll see you in the next chess video.